Hey there, Joe Braun from the DCS Mech Warriors. In this video, we're going to continue with our junior high curriculum and moving into attaching a servo to a joystick on a controller. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my screen here. And in yesterday's video, we attached a servo to buttons. So I'm going to find that particular lesson here. So inside Java, we created a directory, actually a package that we called Servo 1. Actually, I think it was called Servo 1 test at the end of the video because we refactored it so that I could show you how to do that. I did change it back to Servo 1. So I'm going to go ahead and open this particular lesson. And what we're going to do is edit this particular one to add a second servo that will actually be controlled by a joystick this time. So what I want to do before I do that, I changed a couple things, just need to bring you up to speed on. Not anything really major, but I did add an S at the end of examples because we're going to have several op modes. So I thought it'd be more appropriate to make that examples. I changed this back to Servo 1 instead of Servo 1 test. Just because I was showing refactoring, like I said, in the opener. And then the last thing that I added, well, actually I need to delete something. We did find that adding this log.clear function at the beginning of telemetry, that did cause some memory problems to make our robot slower this season. So we actually started removing this and not clearing the screen before we sent the data. So we just pull the data and send it. It updates the screen. This seemed to work better for us. The reason that I had that in there, a lot of example code will show that that clearing function. Let me pull that back up real quick again. So the log.clear, you'll see that in some example code. So now I'm pushing Control Y to, okay, it wants to map it. We'll cancel and I'll just push delete instead. Okay, so we don't recommend using that because it did cause some processing issues. In this year's competition robot, we found that it was better not to have that. And then I added this particular line so that we could see servo direction. Not really a big deal, but we are going to change our servo 2 that we're getting ready to do to the opposite direction. So we'll just add the telemetry for that. So I'll get rid of that comment. So just to kind of clean that up before we jump into the second servo. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and open up my example, my notes basically for servo with the joystick. And I'm going to do a split screen like I did in the last video with that. So what is on top is what we're working on. And then what's on bottom is my notes so that you can follow along. Now, the first thing that I want to do, actually, I don't want to edit this Servo 1. I want to be able to refer back to this as an example. At least that's what I teach my kids to do in class. So before any changes are made, we actually want to make a copy of this. So what I'm going to do is go over here on the left-hand side to Servo 1. I'm going to right-click and go to copy. And then under YouTube here, the package name, I'm going to paste that. So right there. And then it's going to ask me when it copies the class what it wants to name this. So we're going to call this one Servo 2 because we're going to actually add a second servo. So just change the name and push enter. And now we've got Servo 2. So Servo 1 is open and Servo 2 is not. So I'm going to open that. I'm going to move it up here to the top one. And right now I just have a duplicate. I'm not sure exactly what happened to Servo 1. Oh, here it is. So I've got actually 3 screens. I'm just going to close this one. So now I've got a copy of Servo 1 at this point, which we're going to alter to make Servo 2. And then we have our notes down here. Okay, so just like in the previous video, we want to update our configuration file. So I'm going to put an enter and then Servo 2, actually Servo port. And then we're going to be using port 1 in this instance on the control hub. And now I'm going to put Servo 2. So when we edit our configuration file on the robot controller, specifically the control hub, we're going to have a servo plugged into port 0 that is being sent the code in our Java down here, right there. that's being sent the Java code that we're writing, and that will end up going to that particular servo. And then whatever servo we plug into port 1 is going to receive the code that we write for servo 2. Okay, so our configuration file is up to date. Right now, our op mode is disabled. Again, if you were uploading this to a robot, you would comment that out, but we're going to leave it alone just in case one of my kids uploads this to a robot. It doesn't actually end up there and mess some things up. Our group is fine as far as examples, and we still want this under teleop, so everything is the same there. So some of the things I'm going to start breezing over because I've covered those in previous videos. Of course, this is a video in a series, so hopefully you're up to speed with all the previous videos, and we can just start to move forward a little bit faster. So we have servo 1, and we're going to actually leave this so that we can layer the new things in on top of it. So our op mode will start to grow. So I don't want to remove servo 1, but we're going to add servo 2. So when I come down here to my notes, I'm just going to copy this. And so my next servo, as far as global variables, I'm going to add right below that. So now I've got my servo 1 variables from the previous video, and I've got my new ones for this video. Again, we don't want this to be accessed outside the class. We're calling the servo class and then naming the variable. It's grayed out because we haven't used it. I'm also setting 2 position variables. This is just the way we name them that we're going to use a little bit later, but right now I have the buckets reserved. So these are doubles with the names, one set to 0.5 and the other one set to 1. We'll explain those a little further as we get into it, but we've spent a lot of time on variables, so we'll move on down. The next thing that we're going to look at is our run op mode that we're overriding from this parent class, linear op mode. And as far as we're concerned, nothing is changing here. We're not changing the functions being called. So we're still going to call servo telemetry here and there. And we're still going to call teleop. The overall structure, the big picture is all set up. So we don't need to change anything. I did skip over init hardware. We're going to be adding things to each one of these methods that we're calling here in the big picture. But as far as the code in the method or function itself, we don't need to change anything. Init hardware, again, this was the shorthand way. I clicked on the bracket and it opened it up. We are going to add another function right here, but I'm not going to add it yet because, well, actually, let me add it for a second. Init servo 2 has not been written yet. So it's going to show up red if we type that in there. Okay, so right now, if I upload this code, it would throw an error. It wouldn't upload. So what I can do is just comment that out, and we'll leave it there. We'll come back to that in a minute, but right now it would be an error. We're going to set up our servo 2. Servo 1 we want to leave. So what we need to do is create some space here for servo 2 to go right below it. Now I could come down to my notes and copy that, but how would we do this? There it is right there. Servo 2. How would we do this if we were writing this from scratch? Well, what I would probably tell my students to do is to highlight this and push Control C on the keyboard, come down here to where we want it and push Control V on the keyboard and paste it in. Now, we've created a duplicate, so we've got a red line under both of them saying, hey, there's an error, and all I need to do is change this to 2, and we've got our method set up. Now, we've got some problems inside this one because it's all set up with servo 1 stuff, but that's a fast way to go ahead and change that. And then this method is grayed out because it hasn't been called. Well, we can now come up here and get rid of the comments, and now it's not red because this method exists. So I can come all the way up to here and double click on servo and Control C on my keyboard to copy that, or I can just type it in. But I'm going to come back down here to servo 2, not servo 1. And I'm going to replace all of these variable names with 2. And then I'm going to also change the config file name to servo 2 so that this matches up with the config file now. So if I come back down here, I still need to change the initial position. I accidentally went to servo 1, so I want to come down here a little further to servo 2. This initial position, when we set it up, when it runs through init, we want it to go to the servo 2 position. So let's go back up to the global variables. And our servo 2 init position is this variable right here. So we're setting it at 50% halfway through its motion. So about the midpoint of its rotation from 0 to 1. So I'm going to control C, come down here under, make sure I'm under servo 2 and paste that in. So now we've got servo 2 init position. Now you could type those. I'm trying to go over the shortcut keys because I try to teach my kids the control copy, control paste. So that's C and V. If I want to cut, it's control X. If I want to undo something, that's control Z. If I want to redo something, that's control Y. So I spend a lot of time going over that to teach the kids shortcuts as far as coding because it saves them a lot of time. So that's the reason I'm doing that instead of just typing it out. But it looks like we're all set up in this particular one, except for we just wanted to reemphasize that you can set the direction of the servo. So I'm going to change this one to reverse. Again, tab, and that will fill that out for me. So it looks like these two now match, just double checking. So our servo 2 is now set up. We have called that in our method stacking for init hardware. So now we have 2 pieces of hardware, and that didn't change our overall big picture up here at the top. So it's still calling the same method. We've added some functionality to that method. And the piece that we added, we created our own function down here. Now, we have all set up, but we haven't used it. When we push init, it will go to its init position, but we can't control it. So now what we need to do is add the controlling function under our teleop controls. So here we were controlling servo 1 with a button. We also talked about how you can slow it down. So what we're going to do is now add our second servo down below this. And we would usually, since these are kind of grouped together with one servo, we would put an extra space here to logically say, hey, we're doing a different piece of hardware. So I'm actually going to go down 2 spaces. And what I'm going to write here to control that servo is going to be on line 70 on my screen anyway. Okay, so inside teleop controls, we need to add this line. And I'm going to layer in pieces to this because you see several pieces that are called here as far as variables. And we want to kind of discuss what each piece does. So you've seen the set position before. So servo 2 this time, we're going to set position T and then a tab. And then we're going to fill in a little bit of a math calculation inside the parentheses here so that it knows what position to do, but it's going to calculate it on the fly as we run through teleop because, again, this is in a while loop up here. So it's going to do this over and over and over again as fast as the control hub will allow that to happen as far as the processor goes. Okay, so what goes inside here? Well, the first thing we want to do is we're going to set our position to the center point that we always start with, so our init position. So let's add servo 2 init position. So now it doesn't have any controls coming from the controller at this point. So if you move the joysticks, nothing's going to happen. It's still at the same position over and over and over again that it started off when it ran through the original setup, the init servo. So it's still going to that exact same position. Okay, so now what we want to do is from that position, change it. So we're going to add to it. We're just going to simply take the 0.5 that's already there, and we're going to add or subtract from it. So in this instance, we want to use the gamepad. In this instance, we're going to go with gamepad 1. So I'm going to push tab. And then we're going to use, in this case, the right stick Y. So right stick Y, you can just start to type right. And again, tab, once you move up and down the menu with your keyboard. And then tab, or you can type it all the way out. Okay, so now what this is going to do is take 0.5 and add whatever the stick is adding or subtracting from it. So if I remember right, I don't actually have a robot hooked up, so I'm going from memory here. But if I remember right, by default, when you push forward on the right stick Y, it's going to be a negative. And if you pull back, it's going to be a positive, kind of like an airplane, flying an airplane simulator type deal. So if you wanted that to be reversed, you could change this to a negative. I'm going to leave it as a positive. Or you could come up here to the servo 2 position and we have it reversed. So it actually should work in reverse because we've reversed the servo itself. So you can play with those two things to get that to actually go in the direction that you want on your robot. And again, that's kind of depending on how you're using that servo, which way you would want that to go. But you can mess around with the settings to get that to go in the right direction. Now, what we've found when we use a joystick and a servo is that it's very reactive. It's very sensitive to the movement. If you move it all the way up, it's going to move the servo very quickly, as fast, basically as fast as it can go. So to slow that down, we add a variable called sensitivity. And we're basically doing some multiplication there. So what we're going to do is put this in parentheses. So we're following order of operations back in pre-algebra. And what we're going to do is multiply, so that's an asterisk, by something. I'm just going to put an X in here. It's not going to know what to do there. So we're going to take whatever the controller is sending it and multiply it by a ratio or a, well, we just call it sensitivity. So a multiplier, that's the word I'm looking for. So that multiplier was actually defined up here. I said we would come back to it. So our servo 2 sensitivity right now is 1. So if we're multiplying by 1, we're not actually changing it. So to say that our joystick is affecting the servo too much. So maybe we want to make it less. So we would put a 0.5. So coming back down to here, let me find it here. So if we send it, hey, move a 1, it's going to multiply it by 0.5. So it's actually sending it half the signal that it was sending it just by the joystick itself. So you can adjust the sensitivity by adding in this variable right here. And so again, that's right here. I'm going to control copy, control C, and then I'm going to come down here and place this X now with our servo 2 sensitivity. Now, for some reason I have, oh, I see why. So I've got a parentheses here, I've got a parenthesis here, but I only have one parenthesis closing this out. So I've got to make sure I put in another parenthesis. And now my error goes away. I have no errors up here and nothing on the right-hand side, and that little tick mark that was there. Let me redo that. Those have all gone away. All three of those places have been fixed by putting in that extra parenthesis. Okay, so I think we have everything we need to actually run this as a joystick, the servo on a joystick. Now, the one thing we haven't done is changed our telemetry. So let me scroll down here. So in this case, we have telemetry for servo 1, and we want to actually do servo 2. So how might we change that? Well, again, if I was doing this from scratch, I wouldn't have the notes down here. So I'm going to control copy. I'm going to push enter. And actually, I just thought of something that I haven't covered in a previous video. So what I'm going to do is push backspace and undo that and come up here to line 84. And what I'm going to do is hold down control button on my keyboard and push D, which is going to duplicate line 84 onto line 85. So I've repeated that particular line. I'm going to do the same thing here on this line. So control D. And now I have a copy of line 86 down to 87. I am going to go ahead and move these so I don't get confused on which one's which here. So I just highlighted that and dragged it down here. And then I'm going to put an enter after this, come back up and push a delete to bring that back up. So now I have position for servo 1 and direction for servo 1. I have position for what will be servo 2 and direction for what will be servo 2. So let's go ahead and fix that to a 2 and push enter there. And then change this one. We'll just do a T and tab. So that's a little easier to do. And then now when I look at the screen, this is the description that'll be on the screen, and then the data that's next to it is for that particular piece. But this is a little bit confusing to the user. So I might want to put something like servo 1 position now. because I have more than one servo. So we want to make it clear for our user. So servo 1 position, servo 1 direction. I'm going to paste it in here also and then change 1 to 2 like that. And then the other thing that I might want to do is, because I'm now working on servo 2, I probably have the functionality for servo 1 done. What I want to do is go ahead and highlight 84 and 85, hold down the control button on my keyboard and push the / right below the question mark next to the shift on the right hand side here. So /, and that will comment out both of those lines. I can do those all at the same time. So I'm going to push Control Z to undo that. If I wanted to comment out all these lines, I'm going to pull down Control /, and it will comment out all the lines that I have selected. If I want to undo that, hold down Control, push the /, and it removes the comment. So why would I want to do that? Well, if I'm working on servo 2 and I'm done with servo 1, most coders, at least beginning coders, would delete this. And what if down the line I need to work on servo 1? Well, I have to retype all of that, and it's a much slower process. So instead of deleting it, what we recommend, I'm going to push Control Z on the keyboard, what we recommend is go ahead and just simply comment this out, leave it there so that all I have to do is undo the comment, and I can get the functionality back from the telemetry on servo 1. So that would be the recommendation there. Since I don't need servo 1 at this point, but I want servo 2 telemetry to show up on my driver station. Okay, so I think that is the end of our lesson. I'm just going to kind of go over my notes here real quick, make sure I didn't miss anything. And it looks like we're good. We updated our config file, I think. Yes, we did. Okay, so we're all good. In the next video, we're going to be talking about a CR servo, continuous rotation servo. So instead of moving to a set position, it runs a little bit more like a motor, where it will turn on in one direction, or you could use a negative and get it to turn in the other direction, but it continues to rotate. It doesn't stop at that 180 mark. So that's what we'll be doing in the next video. If you have any questions or comments, I'll obviously put those down in the comments below this video. We would love to help you out, and hopefully we'll see you in the next video. See you later. Bye-bye.